All right. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another session of Seneca Fintech Firesides. My name is Professor Ishaan Srivastava. I'm faculty at the School of Accounting and Financial Services here at Seneca Fintech and the coordinator of Seneca Fintech as well. So, today, my guest is the amazing Jim Marous, and I'm going to spend a few minutes just going over everything that Jim has accomplished in his huge career. So, Jim Marous is a globally recognized financial industry strategist, author, and speaker, renowned for his expertise in banking innovation, digital transformation, and the future of financial services. As the co-publisher of the Financial Brand and as the owner and CEO of the Digital Banking Report, he has become one of the most influential voices shaping the future of banking. Jim is frequently featured in publications like Forbes, The Economist, The Wall Street Journals, offering insights into trends and technologies disrupting traditional financial models. He's also served as the financial advisor to the White House. He regularly consults with leading financial institutions, fintech startups, and technology companies, helping them understand how to leverage data, technology, and customer-centric strategies for growth. In addition to his work as an advisor and thought leader, Jim is a sought-after keynote speaker, and we are very grateful that he made time to come and speak to us. His ability to distill complex trends into actionable insights has earned him accolades across the banking and fintech industries. He's passionate about fostering collaboration between traditional financial institutions and emerging fintechs to drive meaningful innovation and improve financial inclusion. Now, whether sharing thought-provoking analysis or challenging the status quo, Jim Marous continues to be at the forefront of the conversation about where banking is heading in the digital age. Jim, thank you so much for joining us. We're grateful to have you.
It's a pleasure. I appreciate it. It's fun to have the opportunity to work with young people and people that are trying to enhance their learning process in the fintech and business space.
So, we're going to start off just by talking about your own personal journey and motivation. You have focused on the intersection of banking and technology. How did you become an influencer in this field?
Great question. And this may be a long answer, but as you can tell just by looking at me, it's been a long lifetime. So actually joined a traditional financial institution right out of university in the mid to late 70s and was in retail banking. In my first 5 years, I was in the management training program for what was then a top 50 financial institutions, now one of the top 10 in the United States. And it gave me my chops. It gave me the ability to understand retail banking from the application of it. I was everything from a teller to a manager of a branch. I worked in the lending area, in the collections area, and in the marketing area of the bank during my 5 year career. What was interesting as I look back is number one, banking as an entity, as an industry, really hasn't changed that much. We still do the same things. We collect funds, we disperse them in loans, we service people and help them with their financial journey. The tools we have and the way we do it has changed dramatically, as has the competition, as has everything else around it. I went from being a banker to working at smaller financial institutions for about 8 years after that, and then worked in the what was then the direct marketing and database marketing field at various agencies, each of which served only financial institutions. So if you see a trend here, you realize that I was either on one side or the other of a financial institution, but never got out of the banking industry as a whole. A lot of it was focused in the marketing sense of what was being done, but really, as I look back, more importantly, using data to deploy financial services directly to the consumer. So I was on the front end of banking, not the back office side. I then joined a company that is a check printing company, which is interesting because that itself dates my time in the banking. But I was in the marketing field, so they acquired our marketing agency, and I served as a marketing consultant in not only the United States, but I actually built a 35 person agency, helped to build a 35 person agency in Toronto to serve CIBC credit cards. We dealt with all areas of the credit card business. And at the time, CIBC wanted to have an organization and a person who had worked with major credit card companies in the US. So as you see this whole transformation, it again is all in the banking industry in one direction or another. And when I was in my mid 50s, which is now over 15 years ago, I made the decision that at my age then, many people start to hang it up, start to sit on the laurels of reputation. They become less effective. And certainly, given the amount of industry change that was happening, they become less effective just because they're not keeping up with change. And we're going to discuss this in various ways throughout our discussion today. But I made the decision actually initially to better impact my ability to sell financial services, marketing solutions. I made the decision to start writing content. And my thought was, if I wrote a blog about the research I was reading to stay educated in the business, I could then dispense it and make it so I could use it as a door opener at the financial institutions I visited. So I'd say, hey, have you read my recent article on my blog that talks about this research that was available through Accenture, McKinsey, various different companies? If you want me to, I'll send you an email with my article, but I'll also be more than willing to visit you with the actual research. This research is all free. It's just that I put a pursuit into finding it. What it did was it not only generated sales for me for my last years in the sales side of the business, but it also really got me in the habit of continually learning what was going on, writing about it, put my own spin on what I thought the research meant from a deployment perspective. And then immediately upon giving it out to the world by writing it at that time was with Twitter and LinkedIn. By doing that, you immediately empty your bucket. So you have to refill it. So that cycle of learning, dispersing, refilling became the foundation upon which everything for the last 15 years I have done. And that, in a nutshell, timing has a lot to do with it. At the beginning of LinkedIn and the beginning of Twitter, it was easier to get followers that would follow what I was writing. I was writing more pervasively, but that led to my speaking career because people wanted to see me in person and hear what I had to say. And also more recently, since right before COVID, my podcast, which was really another element where I saw COVID starting to happen. I said, with COVID happening, organizations are going to want a way to deploy their information to the marketplace about what they're doing, but they're not going to have salespeople on the road. They're going to have less events to go to. And so I thought this podcast idea might not only teach me things, but it may be a financial benefit where organizations will hire me to interview them or vice versa to put it out in the marketplace. So I went basically content creation, which is really what all I do right now, became an outgrowth upon what I had done in the past, which was a total focus on continuous learning. And it's something that, again, we'll talk about later about how important it is from a career standpoint and to stay relatively relevant to not only the business you're pursuing, but what's going on in the world today.
That is absolutely spectacular. I mean, yes, absolutely. Continuous learning is the way to go. The fintech, the banking industry, the financial services industry is constantly undergoing evolution. And like we were chatting on before the event started, you have to keep up to date. Otherwise, the change will be far too much to catch on. Now, through your Banking Transformed podcast, you have engaged with numerous industry leaders as well. What were some of the most compelling insights or recurring themes that have emerged from these conversations?
Interesting. It's been 5 years now, which is amazing to me because it feels like it was yesterday that we started this. And I started my very first podcast was one before I knew I'd have a podcast, but I did some interviews at an event we put on. And one of the people that were speaking was Gary Vaynerchuk. And I don't know if your audience knows Gary Vaynerchuk, but he runs a very prominent marketing agency. He is as foremost a leader on content creation and the deployment of building a brand as there is. And he was my very first interview. And he made it very clear that I kind of was on the right track for what I was trying to do. And it was a matter of saying, okay, but how good is it for you to learn and disperse your information if people don't know about it? And so he
Hmm.
gave me the wherewithal and the mindset of saying, how do you distribute this? How do you market what you're doing so that it's just not, I think the saying is if a bear does something in the woods, do you know it happened? Well, or if a tree falls in the woods, maybe I'm mixing stories, but the reality is you have to make sure people hear it. But as I go through all the people I've interviewed in business, in marketing, in financial services, there's a couple key elements that are more important today than ever. Number one, size doesn't matter.
Hmm.
An institution of any size today can excel at deploying financial services, be it a fintech, be it a traditional community bank, be it a large top 10 or the biggest financial institution in the country. The ability to compete now is greater than it's ever been because the resources to be able to build composable solutions that are deployable in components as opposed to building an entire banking ecosystem is more true today than ever. So I've interviewed organizations that are 1 billion or less in assets, and they're doing things that compare to what are being done by TD Bank, by Royal Bank, by Chase Bank, and by the global leaders in financial services. Yes, it's a little different, but they don't have to spend billions upon billions upon billions to do this. And this is also the fintech leaders. What also became very apparent in both interviewing smaller financial institutions, but more so interviewing fintech leaders, is that it's not the technology you buy to deploy a good solution. It's the leadership you have to continually evolve and build a vision for growth. So the organizations that I've interviewed that are the very best in financial services today, if you peel back the layers a little bit, you're going to realize it's the leaders, not the transformation process itself, that is making the difference. The gentleman who is the CEO of Lemonade, the insurance company based out of New York, said it very well. He goes, the only thing that stands in the way of effective business and banking transformation is ineffective leaders. In other words, leaders that have been there forever, what we'll call the back leader, the leaders from the old days, the
Hmm.
legacy leaders. Legacy leadership that does not want to change the way they built banking, stand in the way of transformation, which is an evolving process that's not a destination, but a process. And leadership is so important. Now, leadership can come from any area. It can come from a brand new entry into a financial institution, a person who just
Hmm.
joined. It can come from a visionary leader that says, I know banking used to be like this, but we need to do it differently today. And when you build the right leadership base and the right leadership culture, what happens is you realize it's not going to be about how do I deploy a solution that looks good on the outside of a phone, but how do I build the foundation in the back office, technology wise, that will drive a good experience on the phone? Now, the challenge with that is if you don't have great leadership, if you don't do a great job communicating with your employees, if you do not let everybody know they are part of the future if they want to take those steps that are necessary, if you don't do that, what we have found in banking is that you have people that will inadvertently or intentionally subvert the process.
Hmm.
Everybody today is fearful of their jobs being replaced by AI, technology, whatever it is. These people are all needed because the best deployment is a combination of digital plus human. But if you don't communicate, if you don't let people know that they're going to be able to be part of the solution, they will, intentionally otherwise, say, we can't change what you're wanting to change in the back office. And the key of digital transformation is not to digitize or automate existing processes, it's to rethink processes for a digital world. In other words, it's not about building PDFs. It's about rethinking the entire process so you can get down to, let's say, a 3-minute account opening process or a 3-minute loan application process.
Jim, you've made some very profound points, but I want to circle back to the first point you made. It's interesting that you said that size doesn't matter when it comes to fintech implementation, because common perception goes that fintech is really a plaything of the startup space, and that larger, most established organizations are far more risk averse and far more conservative to try to experiment to the same degree as a small institution would. How did that happen?
Well, it's interesting because sorry for the dog on the background. It's going to,
Not at all.
it's Christmas time, so deliveries kind of rile the dog up. I think what we find is that when you look at smaller organizations, they tend to be more risk moderating as
Mhm,
opposed to risk adverse. Some of the biggest organizations, if I take in the United States, I'll take the United States, I'll take Canada. I'm familiar with that marketplace as well. If you take any of the medium-sized organizations, which tend to be everyone other than number one in either one of our countries, these organizations many times have a hard time accepting risk, making change happen, and disrupting themselves because they have such a legacy core and because you have a management team that isn't as visionary. The
mhm,
key today is to be resilient, and fintech firms have the ability to continually look at what's going to be coming up in the future so that they can become resilient and ability to adjust based on market changes. Let me take one great example. When we came into the COVID period, we
mhm,
thought the world is changing more now than it ever has. Our whole way of doing everything is disrupted, and we have to continually adjust. And in the United States and in Canada and in Europe, we had the government giving basically money out to help COVID issues. The reality was, in most cases, financial institutions had all but a couple days to implement a COVID lending process, a way to give COVID loans and to be able to adjust financially. They were given a couple days to implement something by the government. Now, what could go wrong when the government creates something and gives you only a couple days to adjust to it? Well, we found out very quickly that financial institutions of all sizes, including fintechs, could make adjustments in a matter of days, where in the past, if you had asked them to do this in the normal world, would have taken them a year to implement. So immediately we became aware that change can happen quickly and you can make changes to what happens in the marketplace quickly. What was interesting was we thought COVID was the most disruptive thing that ever happened until 2 years ago when the economy got very indecisive. We ended up with interest rates changing, which hadn't happened in
mhm.
over 20 years, going up, where money wasn't free anymore, where the whole marketplace had to worry about, are we going to generate enough deposits? Are we going to get enough capital? We're still dealing with, are we putting risk into the lending process that shouldn't be there? We're rethinking business altogether. But this change is much greater than the COVID change. So what has happened is it's become aware that when you're doing digital transformation, when you're building a fintech, when you're trying to compete as a fintech, you can't think of a point in time. Let's take buy now, pay later. Great product. But even that has gotten under government regulation. What is your next trick? What is the next way you're going to compete with? A lot of companies are doing the same thing in different sizes. The way you do that is to continually build your transformation back office to be resilient and be able to adjust to anything can happen. Is your organization ready if all of a sudden people decide that they can no longer afford living and they start
Mhm.
going bad on their credit? What is your modus operandi? What are you going to do with
Right.
that?
Mm,
Let's take something current. If 25% tariffs get applied to Canada, how does that impact your small business banking
mm,
relationships? How does that challenge your relationships with, if you're a big financial institution, with car companies that are going to be impacted so greatly and agricultural people? So the vision today, the way bankers are looking, they're looking not to build to catch up, but to go beyond. Now, they're doing this in composable ways, and like they're not doing a complete core replacement in most cases. There are examples. I'm going to be at an organization on Monday that has done that. But the reality is it's the resilience. It's being less risk adverse, but more risk moderating or management. Because, WeBank in China is a great example of building the biggest digital banking organization in the world. But the majority of their customers have a relationship under $200 because the relationships have all been built on financing a mobile device. But what they've done is they've used the mobile device to determine if the person is going to go good or bad on the loan. They're not using credit bureaus. They're looking at who you talk to, how long you've had the phone, how much you travel, is your phone in the same place as you are? All these different dynamics. They realize I can identify the bad people without having to identify who's the best. And they realize as a mass, they can offer financial institutions to the masses without having to worry about individual risk. They look at the composite risk.
Okay, so from what I understand, essentially what you're saying is that digitization in fintech, it's not so much about scale, it's not so much about innovation and implementation itself, rather a rethinking of the processes. And all the institutions, large institutions, have more processes that they can rethink through.
Exactly. The benefit of fintech is, number one, in 99% of the cases, you don't have the infrastructure. You don't have the cost of infrastructure. You're built digitally. Secondly, you can adjust your digital back office in an instant. You can make adjustments. It's very flexible, while the bigger financial institutions really don't have that back office purely digitized. Size matters only when you look at, are you scaling to a point where you're going to make money? The big thing that happened with COVID is free money went away. So not everybody gets financed anymore. So you actually have to build a business. It can't be just, okay, as long as we get our next funding round, we're profitable, or we can stay in business, not even profitability. The best fintechs today in the world, the Revoluts, the Chimes, the SoFis, a number of other companies, are those that have built a strong business model to succeed with whatever size they grow to in scaling capability. So, scale still matters because you have to get customers.
Naturally.
More importantly, building a profitable business is more important than building something that somebody will invest in. It's great if you can get both.
That makes sense. That makes perfect sense. The second point you made was about leadership and how that can completely change the game. Now, you have worked with the White House itself, and that's the very epitome of leadership. What was that experience like? What did you do over there? And what do you feel are the key qualities of a leader when it comes to financial technologies and banking as a whole?
It's interesting because we know it's there, but it's, how does a current leader change their stripes? I tell most of my clients today are organizations that sell to financial institutions, not the I'm going to a financial institution on Monday, going to be talking to them about the future of banking, about core transformation, other things. But for the most part, my clients are those that serve the financial services industry. What I have told them is, honestly, as a salesperson by heart, I could tell within 5 minutes of meeting the financial institution's leadership, top leadership, whether or not they really are. I can't tell them if they're going to buy what you're selling, but I can tell if they're going to deploy it the way it should be deployed based on who these people are. Because financial institutions today are buying a lot of services from fintech companies, and then they come into the office, and the first day that they have the relationship, the traditional financial institution will say, I like everything you said. I want everything you've promoted that you can do. However, for an identification, we want to require you show a driver's license. That's a U.S. thing more than anything else. But the reality is that driver's license step, which means the consumer's got a key punch, adds 7 minutes to the process where
Mm.
that can be replicated and done better through digital means. But if a financial institution hasn't embraced all the elements of digital transformation and the idea of what's possible,
Hmm.
they won't succeed. Now, size does not matter in the sense that I can tell you a mid-sized organization that does it very well. I can show you a very small organization that does it well. And without question, Chase Bank, their leadership has the forethought and the foresight to be willing to make mistakes and roll from them. Now, they have the cash to be
Naturally,
cash to be
yeah.
able to do that.
Hmm.
But how do you balance that? How do you not limit the innovation process? And leaders really, they must be able to embrace change. And embrace change meaning you're continually looking at what's coming up. You're continually learning. You have ears that are going to listen. You embrace change. You take risk. Now, I'm not saying you're going to put your financial institution at risk because of it, but you're going to look at modified risk. You're going to find ways to serve those that are in the B and C categories as opposed to just the A's. If I wanted to go after just people that were massively credit worthy, I'm going to have a hard time as a fintech or any firm making headway. On the other hand, if I found a way, and not many institutions have been able to do this, to offer a line of credit of any size, so maybe to virtually 80% of your customers, you're going to succeed. And what's interesting is there are virtually no institutions that are doing that. I could build a financial institution today that
Hmm.
I can determine credit risk based on how well you're paying your rent, how well you're paying your other creditors, how long have you been a customer. And while I may only give you a $200 line of credit, what gets in the way is bankers' thoughts that I don't want a $200 line of credit customer. I want a $1,000 minimum. Well, that changes the dynamics of who your customers are immediately. On the other hand, if I said, I want to, if management told me, you get in a room with all the people that are going to be touching this service, and you've got to build a credit product that's immediately accessible on the phone. So all I have to do is open my mobile app and I see I have this much credit I can access today, and it will automatically be accessed if I draw my account down.
Hmm.
The reality is anything over $50 is going to be valuable to the customer to a degree because that would cover an overdraft of maybe $35 and make it so I'm not paying that, but instead have a small line of credit. Rethinking the way we think of banking makes it so that we can serve so many more customers from a demographic profile. That's what WeBank's done in China, but that's what other banks have done. I have a bank in Poland that did this product 7 years ago. And they basically said, when we got everybody in the room, including compliance and legal, and made everybody basically, you had a mission. You have to do 80% of the customers have to get credit, find a way to do it profitably. Everybody's role changed. But when everybody pulled in the same direction, when the leadership said, this is what we need to provide to generate new customers, to generate new loans, and to not put our company at risk, you can do it. The major mindset change was don't set parameters on what that minimum amount can be, because let's say you get a $100 line of credit, but you need $200. The button's right there that says, I need more. Then you get more into the regular process. But think about that. Are you going to leave that financial institution? No. In fact, are you going to open an account someplace else? Because you're going to ask, okay, you're going to give me a line of credit immediately, aren't you? Because I have that where I have. I'm
Hmm.
not going to do that. There's common sense ways to do banking today. And that's where the fintech firms came into play. They looked at the common sense way of personalizing, using digital products, using digital tools to make products better, to save time and money, because the consumer is in control. What
Hmm.
they want, how do you save me time? How are you transparent? How do you make my life easier? I use Uber and even the car GPS system as an example. It wasn't 5 years ago, probably a little bit more now, that GPS system simply told you how to get from point A to point B as a map would.
Hmm.
Now, through crowdsourcing, you get adjustments at every stop based on what traffic patterns are. If the traffic is going to be held up by too much based on the crowdsourcing, it's going to give you an alternative route. It's also going to tell you if you like your favorite coffee at Starbucks or at oh geez, Horton's, you'll have those locations located and it'll tell it to you proactively because it knows that's how you travel.
Mm,
Uber's the same way. Uber is it's a fintech in a way because it
mhm,
basically holds your funds. It automatically does your payments. But what's interesting, when I go overseas, I get off the plane, I get an Uber. The Uber immediately, the app tells me, by the way, do you want your dinner delivered to your hotel? Here's three options. And the three options have to do with what I have bought in the past based on where I've gone in my travels. And they have some partnerships with Open Table and some other apps. But basically, it's going to give me food I like to have delivered. If I
mm,
don't react, they're going to go, by the way, here's three restaurant recommendations we can take to you to once you get yourself checked in. Guess what? They're selling travel services, but they're doing it in a proactive way on a very personalized basis. This, again, is how you build the mindset for what is the future, which is embedded services.
mm. So from what I understand, you're saying that the two most important leadership qualities would be one of customer centricity and two of critical thinking to actually question processes as they are and try to streamline them and make them more relevant. How can young professionals train themselves to be better at these things so that they can become the leaders of tomorrow?
In my mind, the biggest recommendation I would give is to have that critical thinking means that you're continually learning.
Mhm,
Your process of learning does not end at the end of your your semester, your series of classes at university. In fact, your learning experience expands
mhm,
because while in classes, you're getting individual learning segments that build on each other. Once those doors open, and in fact, I will even argue, even today, to be able to deploy what you're learning in classes, is to use critical thinking beyond what you're being taught. Today's skill sets in the last, since November of 2022, when Gen AI was introduced,
mm,
the reality is the ability to prompt has become more important than any other capability. The ability to ask the right questions. I remember vividly how many people tested ChatGPT and said, it's no smarter than Google. And very quickly, you realize the way you make it smarter than Google is you look in the mirror and realize you're controlling this process and you're dumbing down the capabilities. And so, what you really need to do as you go into the business world or you stay in school and or become a teacher is you have to continually rattle the cage of things you don't know. I mean, I'll take you
mm,
for an example. You've developed a podcast. You're using your podcast to bring new thought leaders to the table for your classes. But I'll guarantee you, there's not one podcast you've had where you haven't been the learner as opposed to the teacher.
mhm,
And it's opened up thought processes or mindsets that were different than you had at the beginning. That's a learning process. And
mm,
and then the ability to deploy those things. So when you look at going into the business world, the recommendation I give is number one, continually challenge conventional thinking. Learn how to prompt to get AI to help you
mhm,
think differently.
mhm.
Continue to do research. I mean, now more than ever, and I'll talk about just the regular world. You know, we just went through an election cycle. I don't know if you realize that, but we had an election in the United States.
Yes.
um, a bit crazy. However, as you get into the process, I did more fact checking on my own because what happened, you can say anything you want. You can lie, you can do anything you want. We see that in politics all the time. But you want to get a fact check to say, okay, is this really a true statement or is it taken out of context? We're going to need to do this more than ever in business and in social life to be able to say, what is the truth? It is harder. I mean, I'm sorry, I go back to the days when we had three channels on our TVs in the United States and the news always saying the same thing. Well, now news breaks, we've had news breaks since we've been on this podcast that are startling to the world and the world becoming one. So I think the key is to continually learn, to continually challenge, and to make good choices to where you go. I challenge people today that some banks, when you go, if you want to get in the banking industry, they may put you in a rotation process. And if they say we start our new employees in a rotation, we're then in a rotation for 2 years to have the employee learn how we do things. Right there, I challenge the person and may not get you the job, but the reality is, should your first role in banking be to learn how the bank does things? Or for you to be put in a place where you can challenge conventional thinking with what you've just learned in the last 2 years, last 3 years, last 4 years.
Hmm.
If an institution is willing to say, let's think about this, it's the right institution. If they're saying, no, we have the stable way, you know immediately this transcends the overall organization. And
Hmm.
how much do I lose in the 2 years that they're teaching me how they do things, unless it's a progressive institution and they allow you the ability to learn as you go? You can make it your living. I mean, U.S. Bank in Minneapolis is a very big financial institution in the States, and they are very innovative. I'm sure they have something similar to a traditional management training program, but I know that leadership will give me the ability to think beyond the norm.
I'd like to point out EAJ, who very correctly pointed out the correlationship between continuous learning and continuous questioning. Like you said, you got to question why things exist the way they do, and why should we continue doing them the way we have been doing them all along. And that really does form the key of disruption. And following on the US elections that just happened, we have been hearing about them all. The entire world has been hearing about them, and
Even in the last couple of days.
oh,
Yes.
oh, oh.
In fact, yesterday, in fact.
I mean, most people barely talk about anything else. But I was having another conversation with another person earlier on, and they mentioned that if you get rid of the rhetoric, if you get rid of all the drama and the hype, it does boil down to the fact that everything that's going on is extreme disruption, which means it's an opportunity to challenge the status quo, to change the way things are continually done. The only way you can expand your board, your horizons, is by looking at new opportunities, whether it's because you do it by yourself. It's better if it's self-driven as opposed to being imposed upon you. But either way, it is an opportunity for exposure. Say, for example, we look at the education system. Pre-COVID, it was in person, in class. My program, say, for example, since 2018, we've been delivering it in hybrid, which is why when COVID came through, we just moved online. It was barely an issue. But it forced us to see, COVID forced us to see that online teaching, online learning was a viable option entirely. Now, because we had been doing this
And
earlier on,
sometimes not a structured learning process. For instance, my son graduated from university 3 years ago, and he is currently self-teaching himself programming and analytic skills through
mhm,
YouTube.
yeah,
There, Gary Vaynerchuk's another person that doesn't necessarily believe in traditional learning being the only
mhm,
way to do things. But the reality is there are ways now to learn if I wanted to, can't do it. If I want to learn how to program, how to code, how to prompt better,
mhm,
there are classes that talk about how to build better prompts, which is something I am doing
mhm.
because that's the skill that I realize is going to reinforce my traditional thinking.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's the thing. There are a million resources to learn from. The problem is, say for example, back in our day, we had to memorize stuff, we had to remember
Yeah.
concepts and stuff, because there were for so few options that we had availability, that we had exposure to. We essentially were living in an information drought, so we had to hold on to every piece of information that we got our hands on. Now we're living in the exact opposite. We're living in an information flood. There's way too much information out there. Some of it is entirely just detritus. So now the challenge is not to memorize for the student, it's to winnow and pick out the relevant pieces of information. And like you mentioned, the whole change that came in with Gen AI, that just takes it to a whole new level. A lot of people I've seen, they take whatever Gen AI gives them as the gospel, whatever they put in ChatGPT, whatever the return is, well, that's what I'm going to believe in. And that is something that really needs to work on. How do you think it's been affecting the industry as a whole?
Massively, in two different ways. Number one, there's probably not a financial institution that doesn't mention it in every investor report and every meeting they have, but they're not really deploying it. They're deploying Gen AI and AI in general very well in the risk and fraud area, because that's where its foundation really was. Building models that help me identify something is not right. Today, the deployment of those same tools toward making things better. It could be reducing costs in the back office, but more importantly, how do you deploy something better to the consumer? It is completely changing our industry. It is going to change it, I believe, to the point where each individual will have a digital twin, a digital entity that will make financial decisions on my behalf in conjunction with a financial institution. Now, maybe it'll be two entities talking to each other. Maybe the bank's gonna, or the savings organization is gonna build a digital twin for what they think I am based on the information I have. And they're gonna talk to my digital twin and determine what's best. But the reality is it's all gonna be a look forward. And I believe it is very hard for me to have the time to manage my own financial life in a world where crypto goes up 3,000 points in $3,000 in a day, or where the marketplace, I find it very interesting how many times when a stock market goes up or down, they use the exact same reason, no matter if it goes down one day and then it goes up the next day. It uses the same unemployment report. You go, what am I missing here? The reality is, as you said, it becomes a matter of challenging thinking, traditional thinking, to say, am I thinking of it from every angle? I gave you an example before we got on there of an author who had 19 contributors. Those 19 contributors made a great book. And instead of asking AI, go through the book and make adjustments as you see, which is more of a grammatical exercise, he said, look at each paragraph. Assume you're going to give it 1 out of 5 stars. In other words, there's something wrong with this. Tell me what you think needs to be done to make this chapter better. Now, are there possibilities of hallucinations? Yes. But when you think about a different way of asking a question, you come back with different answers and a better resolution. So financial institutions today, I think the biggest opportunity out there is using AI and Gen AI and tools of this nature to build more personalized experiences that come close to replicating the foundation upon which fintech was built. I mean, fintech has looked in its tradition, looked at segments, looks at individuals in a way using digital capabilities, information from everywhere. You mentioned, we're in an information explosion. Well, it happens from financial services. When I started in banking and until very recently, if I wanted information on a program I did in marketing or on a customer base, I'd have to ask IT. The most progressive organizations today are democratizing that data and insight to the most core level, so that there are some organizations right now that have a gateway to when you walk into a branch, they're going to immediately identify you based on, again, your phone as you walk in. And they're going to be able to talk to you as an individual and talk to you about maybe promotions that have been sent to you recently, maybe something happened in your life on a very confident basis. Not going to be perfect, but consumers don't expect it to be perfect. What they don't like is when you get engaged with a conversation, either on phone, digitally, or in a branch, where no information is being shared. I have a case study. It's not fintech. Delta Airlines, my airlines of choice in most cases when I travel overseas or domestically in the United States. And I was flying back from Amsterdam, and I spoke at a very relatively big event. I was in a nice part of the plane coming back, and it was about one stop, so it was about a 12-hour stop, 12-hour trip overall, and I had to bypass my own city and come back again. But as it may, what happened, my longest period of the flight, my seat would not go back. Not very much a first world problem, very much one that doesn't seem like much, but when you're getting that cost included and the seat doesn't go all the way back, it's a little bit of a challenge. My first line of resolution was obviously the flight crew. They tried their best and they said, tell you what, we can't fix it, but we can offer you 500 miles. Well, anybody who travels any more than casually knows at 500 miles, it's basically a snack being offered by the flight crew.
Right.
It really isn't worth very much. I said, okay, we have Wi-Fi in this plane. I started working with the online service, customer service. Realized I was working with a bot, no problem. We got pretty far down the line. They asked me all kinds of questions about what happened. And at the end of the conversation, as far as I was concerned, it said, we can't help you until you actually land where you're landing so we can resolve this. I don't know why that would be the case. I landed, tried again. They said, well, you're not at your final destination, which got me pretty ticked off. But the bottom line is it asked me the same questions the second time I engaged. I then engaged with a phone service. It also asked me the same questions. Third time I've been asked the same questions. I talked about the problem, they had at least information available that said, okay, we know you're a frequent flyer. You travel with us quite a bit. They came back with a modest adjustment, but I said, I don't think you understand where my problem is. Finally, as some of us do, we hurled the nuclear warhead, which was social media, and said, this is what's happened. This is the problem. I can't believe I can't get a straight answer. I landed, I forgot about it for a few days. About 5 days later, I get a call from Delta. I pick up the phone and a customer service representative, and this is the interesting component of information and deploying it correctly. They told me to begin with, we thank you very much for your service. It appears you had trouble from your Amsterdam flight from Amsterdam to Detroit back to Cleveland. It appears this is what happened. You have obviously used every channel we have available. You've gone to the bot, you've gone to customer service, you've gone to the phone, you've gone online, you've even used social media. I'm going, this person has everything laid out for them. They go, we don't think we solved your problem for you. In fact, we tried very hard to make it so every channel does really well. The problem is, I assume you've also answered the same questions about 7 times. I said, yes. They go, we're trying to integrate it so that all our information is under one hood and that everybody have access. So it's the deployment of insights across the organization. They came back and said, we'd like to refund you the entire cost of your flight from Amsterdam to Cleveland. So for a person that got this flight as part of his agreement to speak, this was all fun money. And I'm going, now I want to get off the phone as quickly as possible because I want them to change their mind. But it's the challenge bigger organizations have today. They're trying really hard to make it so every channel's better. But until they deploy that insight across the entire organization, make it accessible to every individual, you're not going to get your best customer resolution that's possible.
Collecting all sorts of data is going to be pointless unless you're able to insightfully apply it. That makes perfect sense.
That's a key point. We have all this technology, and that's another major gap in the traditional financial services today, be it a fintech deployment or a technology deployment that's outside the fintech space, is organizations buy the technology, but don't deploy it correctly. I mentioned that example about the 3-minute account opening process that you can buy that, but if you mess it up, it's not going to work. But on the other hand, there are many organizations. In fact, in the United States, I would say about 80% of financial institutions have Salesforce as one of their platforms. I would say the number of organizations that are actually using Salesforce on a daily basis is less than 10%. So what's happened is Salesforce has sold a platform that's very popular and very powerful. But unless you help on the deployment, the actual use of that, we've missed something tremendous.
Right. You can use a screwdriver as a hammer, but that's probably not the best use of it.
I've done that, but you're right. It's not the best way to go about doing things.
Awesome. I have this question from one of our guests, EAJ, asks, in the future, there will be agent technologies as such that as a client, I give full responsibility of my financial life to a set of AI agents to optimize my assets and money. That is to make me more money and where necessary, save me money. He asks, how far away are we from this situation, do you reckon? 5, 10, 20 years?
The good news is you don't have me scheduled next year at this time to say, okay, we got to call you back on what you said that didn't happen. I think we're starting to see it now, not necessarily in financial services. What is challenging is the financial services industry is so regulated. It is so worried about making mistakes that it holds up progress. Regulation holds up progress as well, but I say this often in my podcast. I have a personal and a business relationship. I know that if I went into either one of the financial institutions, I'd be amazed at what they know about me and how much they could serve me better. The problem is, I don't know that they know me because they don't talk to me in a way that they know me. Every week or every 2 weeks, I have to move money from my business account to my personal account.
Mhm.
I have two organizations that don't talk to each other very well because the way their organizations use technology. As a result, I write a check to myself and deposit it through remote deposit capture to the other institution. This has gone on now for 4 years, and neither institution has said, by the way, we have a better way to do this. But the reality is, it's very clear in a funds transfer evaluation what I'm doing. In the same way, I use a thing called Acorns, which is a automatic savings program that takes little bits out of every transaction or amounts you set aside to build a savings plan. I have had that for 5 years. It is my biggest savings account I've ever had that hasn't been encumbered in some way. And it was simply through automatic withdrawals that I don't pay attention to. This comes out of the same two organizations, and neither one said, by the way, we can do that for you. So the
Mm.
reality is the capability of doing what is possible is not deployed for various reasons. I think the biggest reason to your student's question is that we're afraid to ask questions beyond the common sense transactions that happen. If you asked me, if my financial institution asked me, what are your financial goals? What gets in the way? What are you trying to avoid? What are you trying to accomplish? You'd make headway. I have a financial advisor that knows that I'm at the point in my life where I don't have to make the maximum return. I have to avoid any loss. I can
Mm.
retire today if I know that the funds I have today are there. We have a timeline. The reality is, I don't want to leave it all on the table. I don't want to put it just to a zero interest savings account, and that may not
Mm.
even be the safest. But ask me the questions. The challenge about those AI agents is, number one, financial institutions have a concern about privacy and knowing too much. The reality is, if you're working on my behalf, if there's a value transfer, I'll give you massive amount of information. When I talk, internationally, or especially in the States, and I ask people, how many of you have Amazon Prime? Everybody raise their hand.
Mm.
I say, each one of you pays $135, $140, $150 a year for that service. What are you getting for that service? You can't say it's
Mm.
free shipping because free shipping already exists for everybody. You can't say same day shipping because you can get that if you look around within Amazon. Don't tell me you're getting it because of the movies or because of the TV shows, because reality, you're not, and you're not doing it for books because you get all those things. What you're doing is you're actually paying Amazon for the comfort of them handling your data well. And
Mm.
you know that the process of buying is made so much simpler where you're starting to build an idea of what I'm going to buy and how I purchase. Amazon knows, as any digital shopping experience knows, what I like. They know they
Mm.
won't probably be able to sell me a light green pink or a brown piece of apparel. You're going to do really well with black and red. My
Mm.
wife kids me that my closet looks about the same all the time. They also know that I'm gonna buy brand names. I like tennis shoes a lot. I like kicks. I buy very, very interesting shoes for myself. So they're gonna put those at the top of my list on things that I
Mm.
want to do. I
Mm.
did a search last night going, things I should get for Christmas.
Mm.
And Amazon gives me a pretty good list of things that I'd be interested in.
Right.
Technology, some clothing. They know I'm gonna buy brand names. They also know I want same day delivery or next day delivery, no matter where I am. So I'll be overseas for a week. And on the first
Right.
day I'll order something. I want to know it got there before I got there. The reality is they manage my data well. They ask me
Mm.
questions subtly, as Uber does, as I mentioned earlier. They start to build a profile. Timing of this, I'm going to be off. I'm thinking within the next 5 years, we're going to see organizations doing that. It won't be in the financial services initially, but I think it's a great opportunity for fintech firms to use profiles to build that. Now, the problem with fintech firms until recently is the trust level wasn't there. People are using them as secondary financial institutions. They're saying, I want to use my Chime account, but you find that you're really using your Chase Bank account. Also, knowing what the primary service a customer has changed. It used to be the checking account. My son doesn't have a checking account. He doesn't have checks. He has a traditional financial relationship, but if I asked him in the right way, what is your most used financial service? It's going to be Venmo right off the bat. He has a Venmo card. So every transaction he has is a Venmo card. Now, what's the challenge to the traditional financial institution? They're seeing Venmo transactions. They're not learning anything about my son as a person, what he buys, how he buys. Between that and Amazon, they're learning nothing. They see the Amazon transaction. For me, it's PayPal on the business side. I get all my inflows and my outflows on PayPal. PayPal knows everything about me. They're offering me lines of credit on a regular basis. My traditional bank won't do that. And it would probably take me about 10 to 14 days to get a loan from them, even on a modest basis, because they really don't know me, understand me, and really know what my needs are.
You know
So
what?
I'm gonna put 5 years and know that I could be off by 4 one way, I could be off by 10 the other. You know, but it's really seamless. And those who are willing to share insights and have trust in the organization, we're seeing it in other industries without as much information being changed. Bank of America in the United States 7 years ago introduced Erica, which was a voice banking process through an Alexa device. The amount of information they collected in those conversations is going to give them, when they finally deploy an AI solution, they know where they're going to start. They're going to start with their Erica customers, because those customers are already used to verbalizing and transmitting information without fear.
All right. It's great that you gave the example of Amazon, because that is absolutely data management done well. At the end of the day, Amazon has to recommend you products, and they've got very limited space in which they can give their recommendations. That is very, very expensive real estate. But Amazon tends to do it well. I mean, of course, they do.
You know, for your older listeners, we call it above the fold in the old newspaper days. You know, can it be above the fold where it's in my first screen as opposed to, and the reality is, think about it. You know, most of us, if we scroll anywhere, we scroll maybe the next 5 recommendations.
Yep.
We're not looking at the masses. You know, I want issues that are black, red, and white. No, they're hitting me with the brands that they know I like. If I ask for his shirt, they know what kind of level of, they no longer ask me between what price range. They kind of know my price ranges. Google's the same way. We used to have to go forever in a Google search. Google is going to give me a different answer if I ask it or if you ask the exact same question based on your history.
I think that is perhaps the key of Gen AI, ChatGPT particularly, is that to get the same answer, you don't have to scroll 10 pages of Google search. You can get it in a single sentence from ChatGPT directly. Of course, the viability of that information is questionable at best, but still, it does make it a lot more convenient.
I ask now for give me references as to where you get this information from. When you dig in that, you figure out that about half of them are not necessarily real.
Yeah.
But they're getting better than that. And as people start using the AI, Gen AI functions, you find your favorite provider. I no longer use Gen AI. I use Claude. And Claude, for me, gives things verbally or in words the way I write. And it's learned that. I still don't trust everything it says. But in addition, you know, my job's at risk. The reality is my writing, my insight I give on financial brand is being absorbed by AI tools, be deployed without referencing that it came from me.
From you.
You know, my research is being leveraged, and it's creating real challenge in the research and in the content area, because my value is having that and having my subscribers subscribe to that. If you get it through Google, you're going to get that compared to other sources that I use, probably in building my thought process.
Right, exactly. But then again, the thing is, your thoughts have your backing.
Yeah.
If you get the same source from an AI, it's not really backed by anything. The
Right,
same question
exactly.
comes when it comes to the actions of AI. You could have AI making financial decisions. Would have AI making a whole bunch of other decisions. But who takes the legal liability at the end of the day for those
Well, and
decisions?
how do you differentiate? So that's the learning, that's the
Hmm,
ongoing learning. Today's social world, not outside of financial services, if you look at it from Europe and Brexit at the very beginning, the
hmm,
United States with Trump and the differences in our political parties, the reality is a lot of what's happening in the political environment is out of fear.
hmm,
People are fearful of their livelihood. They're fearful of people not like them. They're fearful of being displaced in a world that they don't understand anymore because they
hmm,
haven't stayed in touch with change. Now, that's oversimplifying it tremendously. But you look at, most of the things that happened 8 years ago were about shutting down borders. It still is
hmm,
in many cases, but
hmm,
I don't want people unlike me around me because I'm fearful they'll take what I have or what I think I might have.
hmm,
And the reality is that is only a risk if you don't evolve. I mean, if I was to give one recommendation to your students, I'd say build your personal brand, build an
hmm,
identity as to what you stand for and how you say it, how you speak it, how you deploy it. Continuously learn so that you evolve over time and find others like you and latch onto them. I never turned, here's a good example. I never turn down, if I can, somebody who wants to learn more about what I've learned. And that goes the scope of things. The reality is, if you don't reach out to somebody that's where you want to be, doing what you want to do, can expand your horizon, you've lost an opportunity that's today more valuable than anyone. I talk about the fact that during COVID, if you want to start a brand new business selling white thin pens,
hmm,
you could build it and be successful because there's people that want this pen. Now, the key is, how do I find people that want white thin pens? Well, if you continually do the learning process, what's the best white thin pen out there? Who buys those pens? All this, you could build a successful business through the inquiries that are now available digitally. It's a matter of, are you willing to spend the time? And remembering today that Gen AI, the excuse of writer's block or the excuse I want to have time for other things in my life. I gave you an example before we went on the air where my podcast preparation it used to take 2 hours and now it's 20 minutes because of Gen AI tools. And
hmm,
I do 3 podcasts a week. So I gain a day for my personal life because of the tools I've learned to use outside that.
hmm.
Mind you, you keep on learning as you go along though.
Absolutely. I think we're already well over time. So if there are any audience questions, please post them into the chat now.
In addition, I give this because so few people take advantage of it. My email address is very easy. You can share it with them. And you can also share my cell phone. Don't call me, it'll bounce, but you can text me. The reality is, I want to help in any way I can to make banking better and to make bankers better through what I've learned. I am not the smartest person you'll talk to. However, I have made a career out of surrounding myself with people smarter than me. It makes it so that I can continually say, you want to know this information about back office technology? I can tell you in general, but I'll tell you who to contact about that. Or you want to talk about embedded banking? I know the person that's the most proficient embedded banking executive thought leader in the business. It's not me. I take things from him and deploy it to my audience. So again, feel free at any time to reach out. I will not ignore your email or your thoughts. And if I have to, I will direct you into a direction that will make that path a little shorter.
Awesome. Jim, thank you so much. It's so coming of you. Um, would you be averse if our students added you on LinkedIn as a method of communication?
I love it. I love it.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yep. And again, this is the key. Find out who I follow. People say, your question should also be, can you give me the connections or the names of
Hmm,
10 people that should be expanded on my list that do kind of what you do, who you say are great people to learn about what's
hmm,
happening in the financial service industry.
hmm,
I would have probably done that anyway, but asking that question or your students ask that question again, expand your horizon. The one last thing I want to leave is at the very, I don't know how your ages of your students are all over the place, but the reality is start today to find references and connections through LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a live resume. I have over 100 references from the very first job I have to the one I have today about how I perform, how I do things, what my personality is like. If you can't figure out who I am by my LinkedIn profile, you've missed something. But the reality is, I have over 100 of them because, not because I need the pat in the back, but because people always will say, can you give me an example of how you've done this in the past? And I have people that they can talk to. It's the most valuable thing you can do. And the worst time to do that is when you're out of a job or you're out of school. Right now, you have a free pass to do certain things that you wouldn't be able to do if you're fully employed and you have a house and you have 3 kids and you're doing all these other things. So all I say is, prepare yourself because it's not going to get easier.
So students, please take note. Jim, thank you so much. This was an absolutely wonderful session. Thank you, everyone who attended. Please do add Jim on LinkedIn. And like he said, ask him about the 10 connections that he feels you should know about.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jim. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.